Making people talk. You and I have something in common. We both profit if we can get good conversations going and keep them going. What we don't have in common is what happens if we fail. If you fail to get good talk going in both directions, you may be thought of as taciturn, uncommunicative, dull, drab, and boring. You may not get the opportunities you deserve and desire. Those in position to assist you professionally may not be prompted to do so. Those of the opposite sex you'd like to come to know better may not be similarly drawn to you. Those whose social tents you'd like to enter may close their flaps to you. And you may never notice, you may never know you failed. If you fail conversationally, your punishment may be unfelt and invisible. If I fail, I'm unemployed. I'm a broadcaster. My specialty is to talk. My mission is to provoke conversations interesting enough to make listeners listen and keep listeners listening. Sometimes, when guests are articulate and cooperative, my job is easy. All I have to do then is let them talk. More often, the guests are unsure, halting, nervous, ill at ease, inarticulate, terrified, or mute. They may be great writers, business people, crusaders, organizers, makers and shapers of our evolving civilization itself. When I read their book, article, press release, or letter that originally made me want them on my show, they all seem to be full-throated giants of oratory. It's only when the on-the-air light went on in my studio that I realized I was dealing not with the awaited charging buck, but with a glassy-eyed deer frozen in headlights. Once I was trapped on the air for a full 90 minutes with a Miss Finland, on the level now, who could not speak one single word of English. Many guests get on the air who should never be on the air. It's a mistake. It's a misbooking. Somebody should get scolded, possibly fired. But you haven't got time to luxuriate in such fantasies of vengeance when you're on the air live. To hell with the cheese, broadcasters soon learn. Get yourself out of the trap. You've got no more opportunity to correct things at that point than a circus acrobat has to stop in the middle of a mid-air somersault to rewire the trapeze. You develop skills at making people talk, or you find another line of work. My own on-air broadcast career started out weak and gradually tapered off. The first radio station I worked for was a major rock and roller. Mine was the only hour of the day, 11 to midnight, that featured talk. My friends at the radio station listened to my early broadcasts and told me that woman talking about training all those dogs was interesting. In fact, the dog lady was very interesting. The exercise lady was interesting. The leftovers lady, the protein doctor, the mortgage man, the singing professor, the harmonica maker, the cheese taster, the ski pole repairman, the log hollower, that man who had the southernmost brass weather vane in New Hampshire. They were all interesting, very interesting. But interesting won't make it, kid. You've got to stagger us with big names, not just for the listeners. You've got to stagger the sales department, the program director, and the owner of this company too. Interesting challenge. Not many celebrities were looking for insecure late-night talk shows to come be staggering on. I'd done a couple of interviews about Sweden, arranged by Lars Malmström, head of publicity for the Swedish National Travel Office in New York. I knew he worked with Ingrid Bergman on promotions now and then. I told him of my problem. Ingrid Bergman, if I could only get her exclusively on my late night local radio show, would stagger all the required personnel. If I could get one interview with Ingrid Bergman, I could get away with having nobody but dog exercise, protein leftovers, etc. experts on the show for 1 solid year. Lars said he would try. He called me a few weeks later and told me which hour and minute to meet him in the lobby of the Hampton House Hotel on a date 3 weeks from then. He told me to come alone, make sure my tape recorder was functioning properly, and walk softly after him. Ingrid Bergman, Lars told me. He'd agreed to be mine exclusively. I did as instructed, and indeed Ingrid Bergman was mine exclusively too. The only problem was she had by no means agreed to be mine for a prolonged interrogation on her life, work, scandals, hatreds, frustrations, passions, and recriminations. She was under the impression that whoever I was there to do a 90-second travel piece about Sweden for Swedish radio, and in Swedish. It turned out that in my mid-teens, I'd gone to the movies alone one afternoon in Miami Beach, seen an Ingrid Bergman movie, and fallen in love with her. After the movie, I walked into the bookshop right next door and said to the clerk, I want a book that can teach me whatever language it is Ingrid Bergman spoke first. Ingrid Bergman is Swedish, said the clerk. He walked away and came back with a copy of Hugo's Swedish Simplified. It costs $2.50. I only had $2. Do you have anything similar, cheaper? I asked. He left again and this time came back with a copy of Hugo's Norwegian Simplified. The cost was only $1.50. Do you think she'll understand this as well as the other one? I asked the clerk. He assured me that anyone who could understand an American-speaking Swedish could also understand that American-speaking Norwegian. I took that little Norwegian book and devoured it. My parents bought me others, finally going all the way for a Norwegian lingophone course on 16 discs for $50 as a high school graduation present. Learning Ingrid's language, at least the less expensive Norwegian spoken next door to her Swedish, became the kind of passion for me that drives Bobby Fishers and Van Cliburns to virtuoso triumphs in chess and piano at unusually early ages. By the time I was 18, I could speak Norwegian well enough to work on Norwegian ships and win a scholarship to the University of Oslo. I became a kind of Norwegian Zionist. I loved the place, and the Norwegians were unaccustomed to being loved by Americans with absolutely no Norwegian background. Great things were flooding into my life: girlfriends, invitations to different parts of Norway, travel, adventure, the kind of sophisticating experiences that don't often come looking for graduates of Greensboro High School. And all because of Ingrid. Miss Bergman, I calmly said when I saw her eyes were about to become the kind of superstar lasers that can vaporize the likes of me and Lars. I understand how annoyed you must be at this misunderstanding. I also know you've probably harvested more compliments than anyone else alive, so please don't think I'm trying to win my way with reckless flattery. I beg you only to be patient for 1 minute. Literally 1 minute, that's all. To give me the chance to tell you why I want this interview with you. I then proceeded to tell her the story in Norwegian. The glaciers turned into warm and pleasant streams. She accepted. She responded. All I had to do was sit back and listen to my jackpot pouring in. When the interview was terminated over an hour later, it was not because Ingrid ran out of time. It was because I ran out of tape. So you say the woman whose cooperation you need is not Ingrid Bergman, the movie star. She's Isabella in accounting. She's not from Sweden. She's from the Dominican Republic. You did not fall in love with her in a movie and learn her language. You had one short conversation with her at last year's company picnic. And that didn't seem to work any magic in getting her to accept your expense reports with cab fare and to and from the airport merely estimated. Regulations demand itemized expense reports supported by receipts. Isabella loves regulations. Isabella speaks of course, Spanish. A Spanish proverb tells us regulations are for enemies. Regulations are for your enemies. Every language copy and learn. How now do you convert Isabella from someone who sends your vouchers back through inter-office memo demanding taxi receipts signed by the cab driver to someone who tells you this is fine? Everybody knows it costs $15 to get to La Guardia Airport from Midtown Manhattan and quickly expedites your check. How do you convert the boss from one who grunts perfunctorily in your direction when you meet on the elevator over to one who invites you in for an after-hours feet-on-desk, fat-chewing session on the real needs, problems, and opportunities of the company? How do you convert a worker from one who does his job without sloth or drama, but obviously inwardly feels about you pretty much like the shipyard workers of Gdansk feel about the Polish Communist Party over to a loyalist of almost Japanese fervor? How do you convert a grouchy cab driver into your own Secretary of Transportation, an appealing man or woman into a date and possibly a mate, a frosty store clerk into your personal procurement agent, a snippy waitress into your custom caterer, a by-the-books bank teller into your mole behind the counter? Is there really a reliable way, a way you can actually learn the way you learn French or karate, how to turn no into yes? It's against our policy into no problem. We'll study it into let's do it. I've got to wash my hair into we'll meet at 7. Otherwise, I'd love to into I'd love to. Is there a way to convert resistance into acceptance? How do you convert human roadblocks into native guides, dissidents into lubricants? There is a way. It works, and it's elementary. It involves learning some principles. Principles may be too pompous a word. They're more like games. The game has an objective. The objective is not what you may think it is. It isn't getting the job, getting the sale, getting the date, getting the variance, the approval, the improvement, the permission. That's the second objective. The prime objective is get them talking. How are the really colossal deals made? Is it who you know? Is it the old boy network? Is the fix always in? Perhaps. Any big deal might indeed owe to any of those well-known explanations, or less well-known but not a bit less likely. It could be that somebody got somebody else talking. Barry Hornbein is a lawyer and a lobbyist in Tallahassee, Florida. One day, a lawyer for the Seminole Indian Nation came to the state capitol to look around for a good lobbyist. The Seminoles have the right to sell tax-free cigarettes and run bingo games. The bingo games aren't for fun, neither is the lobbying assignment for the Seminole Nation. It's one of the most lucrative jobs of its kind in America, and Hornbein was one of the candidates. The other lobbyists, the pack, jumped the expected way. They tried to impress the Seminoles lawyer with how well connected they were with the governor, the key legislators, the power apparatus of the state of Florida. Barry Hornbein knew a better route. When he was invited to visit the Seminole Reservation to audition for the account, he took over the course of the opening conversation, and not for the purpose of brandishing his closeness with the power people, although, well, he could have. You know, Hornbein began, I've lived in the state of Florida all my life, and I hardly know anything at all about a nation that lives in this same state. I mean, your Seminole Indian Nation. I'm really ashamed I know so little about you. It's undoubtedly because of our poor schooling regarding Indian affairs, and that goes back to the old attitude of the conquering white man. Maybe you can take a few minutes and brief me on a few things I've always been curious about. The startled but pleased Seminole chiefs said they'd be happy to. Good, said Hornbein. I always knew there had to be more to our Seminole neighbors than beads and canoes and open grass huts and wrestling matches with alligators. He proceeded to ask about housing, health, and nutritional conditions among the Seminoles. He asked about their history, their legendary, their language, their customs, their religion, their attitudes, their aspirations, and their feelings about whites, blacks, and other Indians of North America. Was there a split, Hornbein wanted to know, between Seminoles who put on neckties and go to Miami and Tallahassee, and Seminoles who never leave the Everglades? Were there Seminoles who stay so deep in the swamps they don't even know there is a Tallahassee? Not everybody knows it, Hornbein continued, but the federal government only concluded a peace treaty with the Seminole Nation in recent years. Long after we had signed peace treaties with Germany and Japan, we were still officially at war with the Seminoles. The Seminoles knew that, but they didn't know anybody else knew it. Certainly not any pale-faced mouthpiece like Hornbein. They answered Hornbein's questions. They told him of life among the Seminoles beyond the postcard villages and alligator fights. They lectured. They preached. They protested. They shared. They gave. They talked. They also decided on the spot that by the authority vested in them by their Seminole Nation, they would look no further. They had found their man. Hornbein would represent the Seminoles at an annual retainer somewhere in excess of $500,000 a year. Hornbein had heard that Indians are not merely uncommunicative, but monosyllabic. All Hornbein needed was one syllable, and he got it. Yes. There's no single specific secret to making people talk. You always know, though, when it's working. You know by the invisible light and the immeasurable heat that descends when chit-chat becomes communication. It's when eyes shine, brows furrow with attention and concentration. It's when everybody around, though fully dressed, seems to be sharing a hot tub. It's when time passes effortlessly as ideals crackle back and forth. I've known that magic thousands of times. When it happens on the air, I feel professionally successful. When it happens off the air, I feel personally successful. In this book, I want to show you how to make the magic of making people talk work for you.